And so we are back with episode number what number we're on? Episode number 4. And so we're back with you. And so welcome back. Welcome back to Honestly Though, the podcast show. I am your host, Joel Ramsey. This is episode 4 of the podcast show, and in this episode, I'll be discussing my guilt surrounding the passing of my parents, how I have been handling it, if I have been handling it, and I'll be sharing some tips to help with dealing with guilt in your own personal lives, and I guess for myself as well, for when I need to deal with these thoughts and emotions that might come up from time to time. It took a long time to muster up the courage to create this episode. It took me probably an extra 2 weeks or a week and a half. Yeah, I started filming it, but then I stopped because it never felt right. I share how I got it produced and the process that it took, probably. But without further ado, let's get right into the video. And welcome back. Just a little intro into why I'm just making this video, or why I took 2 weeks or 3 weeks to post another video. 2 weeks, probably. I started filming this episode. I was halfway through it, I guess, and I just felt like I was forcing the content, I guess. It felt flat. I realized I still hadn't dug deep into certain feelings or topics surrounding guilt. So I just stopped filming and deleted the videos. And yeah, so that's a bit of an interest though. Why I only posting probably like 2 weeks later. I'm trying to post every week. Trying. So yeah, in this episode we'll be dealing with grief. Guilt. We'll be dealing with guilt. And I want to share 3 aspects or 3 areas in which the idea of being guilty or responsible for my parents passing, how those 3 thoughts have impacted me, I guess, and what the 3 thoughts are. Just sharing basically what the 3 thoughts are. So the first reason why I felt guilty manifested itself immediately upon the incident taking place, and I kind of knowing that it was going to take place, and that kind of awareness that was why I left. And sure, I should have moved out from a very long time ago, but a factor was not feeling safe. I couldn't tell you why I didn't feel safe. I just never felt safe. But whenever my parents would talk to me, because they spoke to me, 2 occasions they spoke to me that it was meaningful, I guess. And on those 2 occasions, I think I've said it before in a previous video. In those 2 occasions, my thought process was to comfort them, because I didn't think that this feeling of danger, I never thought that it was for them. I thought it was for me. I've never had this feeling before, never had this experience before, but there was just something that was telling me that you probably should step back. I feel guilty because, and it's only after the fact I realize what it was or what it could have been. And it wasn't until after the fact that I thought of things that I could have done for them, for all three of them. I was becoming knowledgeable about what might have been happening. For me, I think the whole lockdown experience was what played a factor in the degeneration of the psyche. And it was because of something that was said. I heard from my mother something that was said. And in hearing that, I was saying, it led me to look up ramifications or things that can happen due to isolation or due to separation, due to a feeling of loneliness, things that could develop as a result of that. And one of the things I found before everything happened was psychosis, or I don't quite remember the term. I probably will post it here if I remember the term or the video. But it was about psychosis. And I watched the video, and in my heart, in my mind, in whatever inside me that was telling me all of this, I felt like, yeah, this is what it might be. And it was during that time period that my mother had consulted me about where I got to get counseling, and that was the one out of the two experiences that I had where I thought to be reassuring. And so I referred her to my psychologist or psychiatrist or counselor or whatever the term is, because that was the only thing I knew to do aside from me being afraid. And so I would try to not put myself in a place to be alone. So that was the first guilty experience I had. That one weighed heavily on me because I was saying to myself, why you never say more? Why you never do more? Why you couldn't spend more time assessing what was happening? I was very hard on myself initially, and I think as the benefit of having people around at that time was that I couldn't got into that thought and got into that feeling as much as if I was by myself at the time. If I was by myself at the time, I had to sink so deep into that I probably wouldn't have come out of it. So that was the first guilt. And I do think I get over it in terms of, you should have and you could have and blah, blah, blah. But I think there's certain things that remind me that, wait, have choices, and, even if I make bad choices, then you still have an option to make a choice for yourself. So one of the things I try not to do is take complete blame for feeling like I was being told something and not being able to help more. Because one of the things that, if it never happened, probably the guilt would have been worse. But one of the things that happened that probably was, not probably, I would think it to be God being merciful on my brain, my poor brain, but was that I suggested counseling, because that was the only thing for me. Not the only thing. If I'm being honest, I think there was a lot more spiritual intervention that could have took place. But at the same time, I think there was some talking that needed to also take place. And so I gave that advice. And I think I would have said to my mother and to my father the whole spiritual aspect of it. Because my father called me at around the same time that the whole counseling thing was I suggested the whole counseling thing to my mom. He had called me one evening and we're talking about my brother and stuff related to him, and that the second incident that brought about that reassuring conversation was that conversation with my father, was that encounter with my father. I felt like reassuring him, I guess, that things would be okay. That these two conversations add to why I feel guilty though, because you're saying to yourself, you should have told them how you felt. I felt like I should have said how or what I felt would have happened to me. And then you flash back to times when I don't know if I probably did. So that happening and knowing how I felt about something bad happening to me, that was a trigger for feeling guilty. And that was the first experience of guilt I would say I had surrounding them. The second situation that brought about that level of feeling guilty was not spending enough time with them in a more reconciled character, with a more reconciled character. I would say I was a troubled child, as I say, like in every video. And why I feel guilty was because it wasn't until after they passed that I learned why I was so upset with them. And it was the most petty, ridiculous thing. I don't know if I would have figured it out had he not passed or had she not passed. I don't know if I would have figured it out. I don't know if I would have been honest with myself. But I know I was searching for why. And I think I never wanted it to be as petty as that. So probably that's why I went off into, trying to find something drastic and big, because the only reason I think I probably could only feel comfortable if it was something major. I think looking on it now, I think that's what it could be. But the reason why I was upset seemed to have stemmed from the fact that our living condition wasn't what I was surrounded by. And by that I mean, we went to prep school. I saw a ton of abundance in other persons in terms of wealth. Other parents, I saw wealth. I was surrounded by it on a daily basis. And as a kid, and I couldn't understand why that wasn't the same for myself. And how I came to realize it was I went back to counseling, and I think probably sometime in April, February, March, probably in March or April, not quite sure. And I told my counselor a story that I've said to a lot of people or a few people before in a more positive way. It's a story about why I got into art. I shared that story a few times, and I shared it again with her on this occasion. And so the story goes a bit like this. I was going to school one morning, and my father, I was probably like 6 or something, 7, I don't know the age. But my father drew a bike for me, and it was a nice bike. I loved when my father drew for me. And I went to school with a drawing. I packed it up. I think I carried it in my hand, went to school with it, and I showed that art friend that I had, a friend that was good at drawing. And I think he drew a bike that was better than my father's bike. And I felt some way about the fact that he drew a bike that was better than my father. And I would usually tell people that that period led me to pick up drawing, because I was around my father and I was learning how to draw, and he would draw for me, and my friend drew a better bike. I made in my head that story fit into why I went into drawing, why I became an artist. I used to draw for my father, him used to draw for me. But when I said it to her, she said, what if you were disappointed with your father? What if you're disappointed with the fact that your father allowed your friend to draw a better bike, or couldn't impress me enough to draw a bike, and I was impressed by my friend's bike, and I guess I was ashamed of that feeling of liking my friend's bike over my father's bike, because I guess at the time, you probably at that age you hold your parents to supernatural expectations, or high standards is the word, supernatural standards. And for my friend that was in my age group to draw something better than my father, she said to me, probably I was disappointed. And when she said it to me, I don't know if I was crying before, but I know that in hearing that I was extremely sad, and at the same time extremely unburdened, because I finally realized that what was making me angry with my parents back then, and just continuing into my early 20s, was the fact that I never liked the level of wealth that my parents had, and the fact that I wasn't the only child, and I couldn't get all the attention, some super childish, narcissistic, selfish, whatever things. And upon realizing that, I felt guilty, because I said to myself, if you had sorted out that feeling, if you sorted through that before, then you wouldn't have spent only 3 years of not holding on to things and blah blah blah. You'd have had more time. And that made me feel horrible, and that made me feel extremely responsible for what happened. Because I don't know, things probably would have been different. People would have been in different places. I wouldn't have been such a horrible person growing up, if only I had managed to accept my living condition, accept my life at the time. And so, it left me feeling extremely guilty and disappointed in myself, and just extremely bad. Free to know that, okay, this is what the issue might have been, but guilty because you wasted so much time holding on to different things that, if you process them better, if you had spoken to somebody about it more, or something, or if you were just honest with yourself, then you could have spent more time not holding on to stuff. And so yeah, I felt extremely guilty about that for sure. And that one, yeah, as I said, that came in that April and May time period. And yeah, that one was hard to stomach, because I was already feeling bad that I only spent X amount of time fully letting go of certain feelings that I would have had. I spent 3 years committing to that, while previously holding on to stuff would have happened in increments. Cause I had a good relationship with both of them, but I know that I was uncomfortable. I know that I was not satisfied with the living condition, stuff like that. And I think it manifested itself like really badly in high school. I think there were times when I would I think it was for these reasons why I am a bit more cautious now in how I deal with people or how I treat people. But in high school, I stole from my older brother. I stole money from him, telling him that I would give him back because I wanted to have money to do stuff. So I would ask him for money, but I wasn't giving him back. And my father had to talk to me about it at one point in time. I used to have a 64, Nintendo 64. I sold them. I sold some of the cartridges to make money for myself. So it started to manifest itself in some disgusting behaviors. And yeah, throughout my life, I knew there were just different points where I just was not satisfied with my economic situation. Ungrateful, entitled, yeah. And I only learned about the entitled part, or the term for it, while I was actively reconciling with my parents. And while we're on the topic of entitlement, I found this book last year in June, sometime during that time period. It's called The Entitlement Cure. It's by Dr. John Townsend. It's a good book to read if you're just learning about the subject matter, if you know about it already, and if you're also looking for how to overcome, how to push past that entitlement syndrome or feeling of entitlement that you might possess. So I'd highly recommend it. This ad is free. I'm not getting paid to do this, but I figure I should start promoting books that I read as well, that have to do with certain subject matters that I talk about from time to time. So go and check it out. It's called Entitlement Cure. It's by Dr. John Townsend. Really good book. Supposed to be a bit cheap, for fairly cheap, or like $10 on Amazon. So check it out. So that was a bit embarrassing for me. It was a bit embarrassing, and I think it's one of the reasons why I took some time to make this episode, because I feel embarrassed about how long and the reason for one aspect of my guilt. I felt, worried about just sharing my guilt. But yeah. So when I say stuff like I was like as a kid, like I mean it. Like I knew the things that I was doing, but I never realized that probably I did, but as I said in the beginning, I wanted it to be something more dramatic and drastic, and yeah. And it wasn't until after the past that I realized what it was. So the other thing though, the third thing that I realized sometime during this time period here, why I feel guilty is because it could have been something that I did that put my brother in the position that he ended up in terms of I was going through stuff, and I don't know if going through my in like 2018, I don't know if I entertained anything spiritually that I brought into the house. I don't have the slightest clue. All I know is that in 2018, I was going through a lot, and some experiences that I had when I was freed from that mindset, and my brother came and spoke to me about what he was going through. There were similar experiences, and so for me, that's why I thought things were on the up and up, or things could be resolved. But the guilt that I have now is that you don't know if is you bring something into the the house, into the space. And so that's something that when I want to feel upset, when I want to hold on to the fact that listen, I'm in this position because it is something stupid, I recognize that it could be like a whole heap of reasons that I don't know. I don't know how to explain it, but that's the guilt that I experience presently. That's the guilt that I experience. Yeah. This has been part 1 of a 2-part episode on guilt. Next week, tune in to part 2 where we'll be discussing coping with guilt. See you then.